Hey everybody, this is Perch. Got an interesting viewer mail here. Is family life important to comic creators? I think it depends on the comic creators, but let's see where this mail goes. Hey Perch, one file under comic psychology. That is true. I don't know if this interests anyone but me, but I'll ask it nonetheless. On the unlikely chance that you need additional video ideas, or the more likely occurrence that you need video topics bound to anger a majority of your audience for a multiple set of reasons. I love how you laid that out. Well done. Anyway, this topic does interest me actually quite a bit. You've touched on the subject several times that creators need to focus less on the things said on Twitter and more on the positive aspects on the job. I think that would be healthy, yes. You've also commented on the psychology of being in this line of work, as well as the nature of the industry and how some people might not be able to cope with several aspects of it. Yes, I think there's an isolation aspect to it. I think there's not a good mentorship net built up. I think that you get some people to get into little pockets of support. Most people tend to be healthier, and then I think there's others that just kind of flail around because they don't have that support. But anyway, what I'm asking about is this. Do you think the way people in comics interact with the world is related to their family situation? Specifically, if they are married, but more significantly, if they have kids. It's apparent that you know a great deal of people in the industry, but I don't know if you're privy to personal family situations that inform you to speak to the question. My uninformed view leads toward a majority of creators not having kids. That's mostly right, yes. I'm not trying to make any judgments. I guess I am by the very nature of the question, but it might explain why some people act the way they do. Parents will look at the world differently, and I think since society seems to be classifying everyone by every possible category you can find, this one seems to be a non-starter. Enjoy your channel. I think, all right, so a lot of things that go in there. Let's see if I can kind of deviate between personal opinion and what I think is actually going on. So, yes, I do think a number of comic creators, particularly the comic creators that are coming up, meaning the ones that really have emerged the last 3 to 4 years, many do not have kids. More are married than you'd think. A lot of couples, there's a lot of couples in comics, both traditional kind of marriages. There's plenty of same-sex marriages. A lot of the people that you hear about are married or have at least a very committed relationship that they're in, but less kids. I would say that there's a couple, obviously Scott Snyder's always posting photos of his kids. There's definitely kids out there. The people have, I think G. Willow Wilson will post things about her family and her kids, but they exist. But definitely less than most, I would say. The majority do not have kids. This is a very kind of almost, lick your finger, put it up into the air, kind of to feel the way the wind blows almost statement. Because if you really broke it down in demographics, like what's John Jackson Miller? When is he going to get to this? If you really broke it down, what would you find? I think you'd get, I'm taking a wild guess here, 70% no kids, probably in that realm. Certainly of the writers, I think that's where it would sit. So I think that's kind of the facts of where things are at. And again, I may be off, but I don't think so. I've been to enough cons, met enough people to suggest that's probably true. Many people in relationships, either very committed or married, but less kids. All right. So now comes the question: does it matter? And I think it does. I don't think you have to have anything in order to tell a great story. I think good storytellers find a way and they can work it out. But I do think it creates interesting blind spots. And I think if you look at the comics, in particular the comics we've gotten over, say, the last 10 to 15 years, I think that you can kind of see the result of creators, writers in particular, that do not have children, don't really know how to interact around children. Either the children characters are written very bizarre, or kind of more, I think, likely, the comics seemed aimed at a very, very peculiar audience. I would say an audience of maybe 16, 17, probably even that's a little too young, but kind of like, 18 to 21 to 32. That's where the comics are aimed at. And that makes sense. A lot of the creators, a lot of writers are coming in at that age group. It's an age group that tends to have fewer kids. That's true. People are usually having kids in their 30s, just anecdotally. But it's the problem is, I think that point of view winds up colliding with what the comic companies want. The publishers would like one of two things. They would like either a new dynamic audience coming into comics, getting excited by it, kind of refreshing the coffers, if you will, of comic collectors and fans, or they would like the comic audience they have to continue to buy more. By the way, a bunch of people argue with me on that second statement that the publishers clearly don't want that because they're not writing to that old audience. In fact, at different times we've heard both Joe Quesada and Jim Lee make comments about kind of that old collector audience dying off, and you got to search for new things. But that doesn't, despite those words, they still want that money. They still want that group to come in and continue to buy comics. By nature of when that group complains or talks about not buying comics, it really irks people fast. They didn't really care about that audience. They wouldn't really care whether those people were leaving, but they do. No matter what they say, they care a lot because it generates an immediate, very aggressive emotional response. The challenge is if you've got a bunch of people who really have no insight into kids, well, you're going to struggle with that bring new people in market. And I think you don't have to have kids, but you at least have to understand kids. I think there's a decent amount of writers, specifically writers out there, who really dislike kids or can't fathom the idea of having kids of their own. And I say this from a maybe a weird standpoint of Scott Snyder, running into him a little bit ago, and clearly somebody's into his family, into his kids. And I'm watching other creators crap on him behind his back for talking too much about his kids. Like, does anybody, God, nobody cares about his kids. Nobody cares about him. Like, really pretty cruelly. Same people were like in his face going, hey, Scott, you're amazing. Oh, yeah, man, you're a great writer. I love Scott. Everybody loves Scott. And then Scott turns around. It's like, God, he's always talking about his kids. So screw those kids. Just very aggressive with it. And there's a I don't want to say a hostility, but there's an irritation around kids talking about kids that seems to it's not uncommon, and not everybody needs to have kids. And I think there's plenty of people who don't have kids who can write kids well, but they need to be able to be open to understanding what kids might be into, or just generally liking the idea of children. And if you hate children to the point that a colleague, a very successful colleague, talking about his children triggers you and makes you angry and enough that you want to kind of crap on him behind his back, then, how successful are you going to be at talking and meeting that audience? You're not going to be. And I think, families have a weird way of tethering you. I mean, in a good way. If you, and not everybody needs it, but I'll just speak from personal experience. Being married, having two daughters, it humbles me in many ways. Kids are amazing at doing that to you. But also, you make less crazy decisions. You tend to, you don't drink to blackout drunk territory. Like I don't, maybe others do. But if you have a family, you have kind of more to lose. So you're not going to be as reckless. You're not going to do as crazy of things. Again, not everybody. Clearly, some people do. But I think it's just another additional level of foundation that helps you out. And I do think that there's an element to creators who, they're very stuck in that mid-20s kind of mentality, and that's fine. That's maybe their friend group and everything else, and all the rest. But that age group maybe is not the best group to be creating some of these stories, where they need to do more, where they need to grow an audience, where I don't know. The hardest part for me, one of the hardest groups to always encourage to come in and buy comics and reserve them, maybe this is an entirely second video, was that mid-20s, because this is a group that's kind of entering the workplace. Money is maybe a little tighter. They're trying to figure things out. They're trying to compete with their kind of social standing and group and everything else. And that was always the hardest group running a shop to pull into being regular customers. There certainly were some. That was always the hardest one to get. It was easier to get younger people in their teens. It was easier to get people 30 and up. Just again, anecdotally, this is probably a good video by itself. But If a lot of writers out there today are in that group, thinking about that group, of that mentality, and writing for that group, it creates a mismatch. Do you know what I mean? That's my statement. So I hope I answered your question, but definitely family. I think family matters. I think definitely if you're writing kids-based stories, you need to have a way of understanding kids, one way or another, however you're going to do it. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. You opened up a good topic, so I have a feeling this one's going to generate a lot of good conversation. So let's see where it goes. Thanks for listening.